I stayed late at school on a rainy afternoon. The students had gone home, the hallways were empty, and the old building was quiet, except for the sound of rain against the windows. I was in the school library, preparing a lesson about relative clauses. On the desk in front of me, there were grammar books, handwritten notes, and a cup of tea that had gone cold. I smiled a little when I noticed the tea. It always happens when I prepare a lesson. I start working, I forget the time, and my tea gets cold. I wrote one sentence at the top of the page. The book that has a golden star opens the door. Then I stopped writing. I looked at the sentence for a moment. That sounds like the beginning of a mystery, I thought. And then, suddenly, I heard something move. I held my breath. The sound came from the back of the library. For a second, I did not move. Then I turned slowly. One of the tallest bookcases was no longer against the wall. It had moved forward just a few centimeters. I blinked. That bookcase had never moved before. Behind it, there was a narrow stone door. A stone door inside the school library. I stood up very slowly and walked toward it, step by step. The door was old and dark. It had no handle, it had no keyhole, but it had words carved into the stone. I leaned closer and read them in silence. Only the person who understands the sentence may enter. I felt a small chill. The person who understands the sentence, I whispered. That was not any person. It was the person who understands the sentence. The words began to shine. I took one step back. Then a second message appeared. Find the book that has a golden star. I looked back at the shelves. There were hundreds of books around me. Some were red, some were black, some had silver letters, and some had old symbols on their covers. For a moment, I felt lost, but then I read the sentence again. Find the book that has a golden star. The instruction was clear. I did not need any book. I needed the book that had a golden star. So I moved along the shelves, checking every cover carefully. One shelf, then another, and then, finally, I saw it. A small blue book was waiting on the lowest shelf. On its cover, there was a golden star. I almost laughed, but I was too surprised. There it was, the book that had a golden star. I touched the book, and the stone door opened. I stood completely still. Behind the door, a staircase went down into the dark. I looked back at my desk, at my cold tea, and at my grammar notes. Then I looked at the stairs, and I knew I had to go. I took the blue book and stepped inside. The stairs were narrow and cold. The air smelled of paper, rain, and dust. With every step, the sound of the school became softer. Soon, I could not hear the rain anymore. I could only hear my own footsteps. At the bottom of the stairs, I found something impossible, another library. I stopped. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. This library was enormous. Its shelves rose into the darkness like towers. Golden lights floated above long wooden tables. Old maps covered the walls. Thousands of books waited in complete silence. It was beautiful and a little frightening. In the center of the room, a piece of parchment lay on a table. I walked toward it carefully. I picked it up and read, "Follow the librarian who carries the blue lamp." I looked around. At first, I saw nothing. Then 3 silent figures appeared between the shelves. One carried a red candle, one carried a silver box, and one carried a blue lamp. I understood immediately. The clue did not say, "Follow the librarian." That was not enough. It said, "Follow the librarian who carries the blue lamp." The relative clause identified the right person, so I followed the librarian who carried the blue lamp. She did not speak. She did not look back. She simply moved through the shelves, and I followed her. The corridors around us seemed to change as we walked. A corridor that had been straight became curved. A shelf that had been on the left appeared on the right. A door that had been closed slowly opened by itself. I tried to stay calm. This was not a normal library, but the clues were clear, and as long as I understood the clues, I could keep going. Finally, the librarian stopped in front of 3 doors. The first door was made of glass, the second door was made of iron, and the third door was made of wood. The librarian raised the blue lamp and pointed to the wall. A new sentence appeared. "Enter the room where the old maps are kept." I looked at the 3 doors. Behind the glass door, I saw mirrors. Behind the iron door, I saw clocks. Behind the wooden door, I saw maps. I smiled. Of course, the room where the old maps are kept. Not any room, the room where the old maps are kept. I opened the wooden door. The librarian stayed behind. For a moment, I wanted to ask her to come with me, but she only held up the blue lamp. So I took a deep breath and entered the room alone. Inside, maps covered every wall. There were maps of cities under the sea, maps of forests above the clouds, and maps of libraries hidden below other libraries. I walked slowly around the room. Every map seemed to move when I looked at it. On a table in the center of the room, one final map began to glow. I went closer. At the top, I read, "The path that disappears is the path that leads to the golden book." I looked down. There were many golden paths on the floor. Most of them stayed bright, but one path appeared for only a few seconds and then disappeared. My heart beat faster. That was the path that disappeared. I followed it quickly. It appeared, disappeared, and appeared again. I moved faster, but I tried not to panic. The path led me through a narrow passage and into a small circular room. In the middle of the room, there was a golden book. The book was closed. There was no lock and there was no key. Only one sentence was written on the cover. "Complete the sentence that opens the book." 3 possible sentences appeared on the table. Number 1, "The book opens for the reader." Number 2, "The book opens for the reader who chooses clear words." Number 3, "The book opens for the reader who chooses clear words." I looked carefully. I knew this was the final test. The first sentence was too general. The third sentence had commas. It gave extra information. But the second sentence identified the exact reader. I read it aloud. "The book opens for the reader who chooses clear words." For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the golden book opened, and a warm light filled the room. I stepped closer. I expected to find an ancient secret, a lost map, or a story that no one had ever read. But the pages were almost empty. In the center of the first page, there was only one sentence. "The right words open the right doors." I read the sentence once, then I read it again, and then, finally, I understood. The whole library began to change. The shelves moved quietly into perfect lines. The maps stopped shifting. The doors opened one by one. The hidden library was not testing magic, it was testing clarity. Every step of the journey had depended on words that identified exactly what mattered: the book that had a golden star, the librarian who carried the blue lamp, the room where the old maps were kept, the path that disappeared, and the sentence that opened the book. I closed the golden book gently. When I looked up, the circular room was gone. I was back in the school library. The rain had stopped. The windows were silver with evening light. My grammar books were still on the desk, and my cup of tea was still cold. I smiled when I saw it. Of course it was still cold. But something was different. At the bottom of my lesson notes, a new sentence was written in golden ink. The right words open the right doors. I smiled again. Now I knew exactly how to begin my lesson.
Now, let's look at the grammar in my story. Today, we are focusing on defining relative clauses. A defining relative clause helps us identify exactly who, what, or where we are talking about. In the hidden library, I needed clear clues. Without clear clues, I could not choose the right book, the right person, or the right room. We use who for people. For example, follow the librarian who carries the blue lamp. The words "who carries the blue lamp" tell us which librarian I had to follow. We use that or which for things. For example, find the book that has a golden star. The words "that has a golden star" tell us which book I needed. We use where for places. For example, enter the room where the old maps are kept. The words "where the old maps are kept" tell us which room I had to enter. So remember, who is for people, that or which is for things, and where is for places. And the information after who, that, which, or where is important. It is not extra. It helps us identify the exact person, thing, or place. That is why the final sentence says, "The right words open the right doors." What does that mean? It means that the words we choose help people understand us. When we describe things clearly, we solve problems more easily. When we explain our ideas clearly, people can follow us. And when we communicate with precision, we make better decisions. That is exactly what defining relative clauses do. They help us identify the right person, the right thing, and the right place. Sometimes one small detail changes everything. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to English with Presence. In this channel, we learn English through meaningful stories, grammar in context, and practical PDFs for students and teachers. Download the worksheet, review the examples, and practice the grammar at your own pace. Thank you for learning with me. See you in the next story.